Hi everyone, this is Tuplex, and welcome to my LTN tutorial. This will be, I would say, a basic tutorial. I'll cover most of the basic functions of LTN, which is Logistic Train Network. It can be a very powerful and also a very complicated tool, depending on how deeply you want to get into the details of using it. I'm just going to demonstrate some of the more basic use cases here and explain how I've used it in my last series and now in my latest series in 0.16 Factorio. So once you install the mod, there is a bit of research that you need to complete. So there's this research Logistic Train Network, and that gives you the ability to create the logistic train stop, which is just a normal train stop plus a couple of red circuits. And these are the logistic train stops here. So you can see that, actually, let me get a fresh one. When you go to place one down, it actually gives you several different entities. One is the train stop itself, and then there's also what looks like a little combinator and a light, and those are used for different things, which I'll get into. They do require power, so you need to have a power pole close by so that they get the power. And then the light gives you some indication of what's going on. So a green light in this case means that the station is ready. A purple light indicates that you have a duplicate name. Duplicate names are not allowed for LTN stations unless they're a depot. But I have not done anything to configure these as depots yet, so that's why it's giving me that purple light, which indicates an error. And essentially what this mod allows you to do is to set up your train network to run on supply and demand, kind of like you would with a robot network. If you're experienced with that, you know that you have, for example, provider chests and requester chests. So the provider chest puts stuff in. The requester chest, you put in there what it is that you want to receive, and then the bots take care of the rest. Well, this works much in the same way. So you set up provider stations and you set up requester stations. And the third type of station is the depot, which is kind of like the RoboPort in our analogy. That's where the trains go to wait for instructions when they're not carrying something back and forth. So I've set up just a little test loop here with a single train, and I've got some chests with concrete in them. Actually, I'm going to remove some of that concrete just to make this go a little bit quicker. Because this is the map that I'm currently working in, and okay, that's 400, 400, 1, 2, 3, 4. There we go. Yeah, this is the map for my latest series, and I still don't have a lot of upgrades yet on my stack inserters. So if I put a lot of material in there, then the test examples might take a while to complete. So, like I said, LTN allows you to set up the network to run on supply and demand. Normally, what I've seen, the way that most people schedule trains is you tell it to go pick up the material, wait there until the train is full, and then bring it to the receiving location and wait there until the train is empty. So when you do that, you essentially need at least one train dedicated to that route from point to point. So I think that you end up with a lot more trains being required to make that work. You also have trains waiting at stations with material inside them, whereas with LTN, you really don't use trains to store stuff. So with LTN, you pick up what you need, you drop it off, and you should end up with an empty train after that's been completed. So let me start to explain a little bit how we set this up. So I'm going to start with the depot. And I've already named both of these to depot. Now, to let the train network know that what you have is a depot, you need to use a constant combinator. And these are used on pretty much every LTN station. You're going to have a constant combinator because you need to send it configuration signals. And then you connect that with a green wire to the light. The light is where you provide signals to LTN. If you hook it to the station itself, or if you hook it to the combinator, then you won't get the result that you might be expecting. All right, so then we open the constant combinator, and over here in the signals area, you'll see that we have a selection of new signals available to us that we can send to the station. So the one that we need here is this one here that says stop is depot. Okay, now we can see that the light changed to green. And I'm just going to copy that same signal over there. I'm going to connect that with a green wire. Now, let me check something real quick. I know that it used to be that you have to connect it with a green wire and not a red one. I don't know if that's still the case. All right, so it looks like red wires may work here before, but I remember reading somewhere at one time that it had to be a green wire. So I'll use green wires just to be safe. All right, so now these are both a depot. So how do I get my train to be controllable by the system? Well, to do that, all you have to do is take your train, send it to the depot. In this case, I'll just send it with inactivity as the condition. And you just send your train to the depot in automatic mode. And it'll go and wait for instructions. So now this is being controlled by the LTN network. And the blue light means that this is a depot and there's a train there ready for instructions. Okay? And that's pretty much all that you have to do there to get that going. All right. Now, on the provider side, to set up a provider station, one of the first things that we have to do is we'll put another constant combinator, and I'm going to connect that to the light with the green wire. Okay, so let's check the other signals. Now we've got other options here. There's the encoded network ID, so you can actually create separate networks, separate logistic networks on the same rail network. So if you want to have certain stations that only work with one another and not with all the other stations, you can assign different network IDs. But by default, everything that's connected will interact with everything else that's connected. And that's the only case that I've used so far. You can also identify the minimum train length or the maximum train length. So like in this case, this station is only set up for a 1-1 train. So I'm going to set the maximum train length to 2. So this will only schedule trains that have a length of 2 to this station. There's a limit for trains. So this limits the number of trains that can be sent to this station at the same time or ordered to go here at the same time. So in this case, I don't have a stacker or anything, so I'm going to limit this to 1. All right, and then you have provide threshold, provide priority. I'll get to those in a few moments. But if you don't specify a provide threshold, then by default it is 1,000. You can change the default in the mod options if you like. Let me find it here. Yeah, you can set different default request and provide thresholds. But basically what that means is that this station won't make itself available as a provider until it has at least 1,000 of something. Right? If it doesn't have 1,000 items, then the rest of the network won't be able to see it. So that's what the threshold is used for. Okay, so now we have to tell this train station what it is that we actually have here. So to do that, I'll use a green wire again in this case. I'm just going to wire up all these chests. So this tells me now that I have 1.6K of concrete, and I'm going to add that signal there. Okay. So now we can see all the signals now. And now we know that this station has 1.6K of concrete, so it should be making that concrete available to the other stations that need it. Okay, so now that that's done, and I've set this up I've set up these belts just to send the material back to the provider. So this will simulate that we're adding more material to the provider and that we're consuming material over here. All right, so now I'm going to hook up. This is the requester station. That's called requester. And on the requester, you also need to tell the station what you have. Otherwise, it'll keep requesting. Right? So if I tell it to request 1,000, let's say, it picks up 1,000, it drops off 1,000. Now I have 1,000 in these chests, but the station doesn't know that because I need to first connect the inventory there. So it's kind of a similar connection, both sides. So now when I do have material here, I'm going to have a positive number. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the same settings here. Okay, so I've got the same setting for train length and limit of trains. And then the way that you tell the requester station what it is that you want is you select the item. So in this case, it's going to be concrete. And you put in a negative number for the demand. So let's say I want to have 1,000 concrete loaded in this station. I put in minus 1,000. And now yellow means that there's a train assigned. Okay, so you can see that we've got a schedule that's going to go to provider until it's got more than 999 concrete and 2 seconds of activity, or if it takes more than 120 seconds, it'll leave at that point. Okay, so we'll wait till it gets to 1,000. And now it's free to leave. But there's no inactivity yet, so that's why it's still loading. And I'll get into how we can control that better. So if you don't do anything else than I've just shown you, you will still end up getting either full trains or until it runs out of material. And then it'll go. So now it'll come over here and drop off. And when that happens, you're going to see that we're going to immediately get another request. So let me, oops. Let me cut off the flow of the material so that we can build up some inventory here. All right, now if I hover over here, I can see that the signal for concrete is a negative number that's growing. Okay, and that's because we have in inventory now, we've got 200, close to 800, but we have a negative value of 1,000, which is our demand. So whenever we have less than what it is that we desire, we're going to get an overall negative signal going to the train station. And that negative signal is what tells the system that we demand material. Now, in this case, the negative value is 230, and that's where the threshold comes into play. The system right now will not send a request for material until we require at least 1,000. All right, so I'm going to reconnect those belts so that we can let those drain. I'm going to put that concrete back that I picked up when I removed the belts. Okay, and then once that reaches minus 1,000, it should schedule another delivery. And there it goes. Now you'll notice that initially it was saying that there was no station supplying concrete, and that's because I didn't have 1,000 loaded into these chests yet. All right, so now it's going to load up everything, and it'll repeat the same cycle again. All right, so I'm going to let this complete. I'll let it empty out the train, and then I'll get to the next test case. And while it's doing that, I'm going to wait till it gets here, and then I'm going to turn off the request temporarily so that we don't keep looping. And while we're waiting for that, I'm going to add another train. And I'm going to send that to the depot as well. Okay, so now we have 2 trains on the network. Now this depot is busy, so when this train finishes, it'll go to the other depot. Okay, so the nice thing about this is that you don't necessarily need to have a train for every route that you want to have on your network. So if you could have lots of train stations, but as long as the traffic requirement is not too heavy, you can manage many stations with just a few trains. Okay. If you see that your depot is always empty and always waiting for trains to come back, then that's a good indicator that you might need to add more trains. But until then, you can run more stations with fewer trains than you can with the vanilla way of doing things. Okay, so let's say that instead of having this run until it's empty or the train's full, like we would normally do in vanilla, what if we wanted to try to control this better? So we're asking for 1,000. What if we want this to only load until there's 1,000 in the car? Well, you can do that. That's one of the advantages of this system. We're going to need an arithmetic combinator on the provider station. And I'm going to set this up to take its input, multiply it by -1, and output it as the same thing. All right, so this basically will convert a number to a negative. Okay, so in this case, what I would like this to do is to, well, first of all, when a train comes to the station, when it comes to the provider station, there will be a signal coming out of this combinator that tells us what inventory the train is expecting. So let's run this simulation again. So I'll put in concrete -1,000. All right, so it'll bring a train over. Now let's watch with the signal. Okay, so we can see that says 1,000 concrete. That's what the train is coming to get. And that signal doesn't change. So what we can do here is we can read from the train station, and you can do this in vanilla too. We can read the actual contents of the train. We can also read now through this special component of the LTN station. We can read what it is that we want to load, and we can use that to control these inserters to only insert that amount. Okay, so I'm going to leave that pole there just so that we can read the signals. All right, so, all right, and then I'm going to remove the demand again to stop the loops. So in this case, I'm going to replace these with filter stack inserters. Here we are. Instead of standard stack inserters. Okay, so what we want it to do is we basically want to send a positive number to the inserters whenever there's less in the train than what the train is expecting. Okay, so if we take this signal, actually let me turn this around again. So I'm going to take the signal of what is being demanded by the train, which in this case is going to be 1,000 concrete, and I'm going to multiply that by -1. Okay, so this is going to be like the demand for the train car. It'll give me a -1,000. And then I'm also going to, add into that, and I'll use red wire in this case. And then I'm going to add to that what we, oh no, I'm sorry. Never mind, that's wrong. I need to add to this what the train actually has. Okay, so now I'm going to connect to the train station, just like I would in an unmodded game. And I'm going to send that to the output of this combinator. Okay, and then I want to change the mode of operation to read train contents. And I don't need to send a train. Okay, so we're going to read train contents. That'll give me a positive number of whatever's in there. It's going to add it to the negative number of what the train needs, so that as long as I have, you know what, this is, I did that backwards. Sorry, I need to connect this in the opposite way. All right, I want what the train expects to be the positive number. And I want whatever's in there to be the negative number. Okay, read train contents. So that way, as long as the train has less than what it wants, it'll output a positive signal. And then we can take that positive signal and we can send it to these inserters and change the inserters to set filters. All right, so we can see there's nothing there, but when it gets a positive signal for concrete, it'll set the filter to concrete and the inserters work. Once that number reaches 0 or a negative value, because now the train has at least as much as what it came for, the inserters will shut off because they won't have a positive value anymore. And you can't set filters with negative numbers. The filters on the inserters will ignore negative numbers. All right, so let's set this request again. So let's do 1,000. All right, here comes the train. Let's take a look at what we see here. Okay, so now we can see that signal is decreasing. Right, and that's going to go until it hits 0. And you can see that the filters are set on the inserters. All right, cargo, there's 1,000, and they stop. So this is where it starts to become pretty powerful. Okay, so I'm going to remove that request again. And when you start doing the filtering, you can do some pretty useful stuff. For example, you can have a provider station that provides more than one item. So I've got concrete in there now, but let's say that we also have some copper plate. All right, now if I bring a train over for concrete, I don't want the train to get copper too. But since we're using filters based on what the train expects, it's only going to take the concrete out of the chests and it'll leave the copper in there. And if I send a train over here that wants copper, it'll put in copper and leave the concrete. Now when you do this, you have to be careful, because if the train fills up and your inserters are still holding on to a particular item, the inserters will keep that in hand, and then the next train to come in will get that item automatically deposited. So if you're doing something like this, there's another setting that you should use, and it's called locked slots per wagon. All right, so in a case where you have multiple items at a station, you want to set that to, I would start with 1 or 2. And basically what that'll do is that'll reserve it'll reserve that number of slots in the train wagon, kind of like if you had done this. But it'll only fill up to that point, and then that way any extra items that are still being held by the inserter will get deposited into those spare slots. So the more inserters you have and the higher your stack bonus, the bigger that number of slots needs to be. But like I said, I usually just start with 1 or 2, and that's often enough to take care of things. And you could do something similar on the receiving end as well. If you have, for example, if you have a train that has multiple items in it, but you only want to take certain items out, again, you can, in fact, let's take a look. Let's take a look at the signal that's coming out of the receiving station. And I will warn you, it's easy to click on the wrong LTN entity. I often have connected to the train station instead of the light, or the light instead of the combinator. So you have to be careful with that. Otherwise, you'll end up not getting the signals that you think you are. All right, so let's wait for the train to come around again, and then we'll be able to see what signal is coming out on the requesting end. Okay. Nothing on the requesting end. Okay, so I think what you would have to do in this case, if you're going to be bringing in multiple items, is you would have to figure out some other way to send the signal to the filter inserters on what you needed. Now, in this particular case, we could do that fairly simply. Let me just make another combinator here. Oh, I can't because I don't have any more copper. All right, I'm going to take some of my copper back. All right, so let me replace these with filter inserters on the input. Right, and again here I'm just going to invert the signal to make positive negative and negative positive. I'll use a red wire in this case. So here I'm going to take a red wire from my settings. I'm going to put it in there. Whoops. And I'll feed that here. And then again, I put the mode to set filters. Okay, so what that's doing is it's taking all the input signals, including the -1000 concrete, which is the demand, and it's converting that -1000 into a positive number, and then I use that to set the filter. So that way these will only be enabled to take out whatever I'm requesting here. Right, so let's put in a request. Let's say we're also going to be requesting solar panels. Okay, now in this case, since I'm using filter stack inserters, that's not doing what I expected, because with filter stack inserters, you can only filter a single item. So for that case, we would have to use regular filter inserters. All right, so in this case, you can see that they're enabled to take concrete or solar panels. And obviously that runs a bit slower. All right, so I don't often do that because I usually don't have, or at least up until now, I haven't set up receiving stations that need to filter what's coming off the train. But this is another tip. It's a good idea to do that even in this case, even when you only have one item. And the reason for that is that if you're not really good with getting your configurations right the first time, you could end up with a train that comes to your station that has something in it that you didn't expect. Right? So what you could do is you could just configure that to set filters based on whatever you're demanding. even if it's only one item. And that way, if a train shows up here that has something in it that you didn't want, it won't unload, because that can mess up your factory. Now, why would something like that happen? Well, remember that this has a condition that it waits 120 seconds. So if you have a train that goes, let's say you have a full train, and because of the way your thresholds and your request quantities are set, you have a full train, it comes to a station to drop off, but, well, in fact, we can look at that case right here. Let's limit these chests to only take one stack, and I'm going to cut these belts. Okay, and let's watch what happens. So in this case, the train's going to come over here. It will start to unload, but it'll stop before it can unload what was requested, because of whatever problem we happen to have. And this happens from time to time. Again, if you configure everything just perfectly, you can prevent this from happening, but okay, so now we still have 455 concrete left in the train car. So now the train is going to wait until 120 seconds have passed, and then it's going to go back to the depot. So now we have a train at the depot that's sitting there that has material in it, and that train might get sent to pick up green circuits or something the next time, and then when it goes to unload green circuits, you're going to get concrete where you should have green circuits, right? And that's a problem. So that's why it's a good idea to set up these filters even at receiving stations. Now, I don't always do it just because I guess I'm lazy that way, but I would say that that's a best practice because it can prevent problems like this from happening. Okay, and that's also why you'll see a lot of times at the depot, you might see a stack inserter going into a storage chest or into an active provider chest, so that if a train comes to the depot that's got stuff in it that still has stuff in it, it'll get taken out. And then at the depot, you can have all that collect in one station, and then that station can act as a provider. Once it collects enough junk of a certain type to exceed the threshold, then trains can go there to pick it up. Okay, and I'm doing that. That's my strategy in my current series for dealing with trains not unloading completely. I'm emptying them when they get to the depot. Another nice thing about this system, okay, so I'll let that go and then it'll request another one. The other nice thing about this system is that because the trains always go back to the depot, that makes the depot a very convenient place to refuel your trains. So when I set up a depot, I usually also set up a requester station for whatever I'm using for fuel, coal or wood or whatever it happens to be. And I fuel the trains there, and that way I don't have to set up refueling at all the other train stations. So I can just do all the refueling at the depot because I know that the trains are always going to go back there at some point. And actually they'll always... Oh, no, I shouldn't have done that. Now my filters are not working. All right, so let's turn this off again. I'll set this back to how I had it previously. Again, this is the configuration that I use. I don't filter what's being loaded. I just dump out extra material at the depot. Okay, that's about all that I have. Now you can get very advanced with it. One of the signals that you have available, for example, is encoded positions of artillery wagons, fluid wagons, cargo wagons, and locomotives. That'll give you a signal that basically says, okay, the first the first thing on the train is a locomotive, and then I see 3 cargo wagons, and then there's 2 fluid wagons and another locomotive. And you can get those signals, and you can set up like universal, if you're good enough with combinators and circuit controls, you can set up a universal station that can accept a train with any configuration in it, and figure out what to load, what to unload, whether it's a cargo wagon. You could set up, you could have pretty much every position on your train set up to provide fuel if it's a locomotive, or not to provide anything if it's a fluid wagon. The options are almost limitless, which is why it makes this mod such a fun thing to play around with. So I hope this helps. If you have any questions, just leave those questions to me in the comments. I'll try my best to answer. I don't consider myself to be an expert on this mod, but I've used it enough that I can get it to do, some of the more basic useful functions. So I'll do my best to help out if I can. Thanks a lot for watching. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.